Thank you for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Mike Monte, and I'm going to be presenting a biblical perspective concerning something about which the hearts and minds of millions of Americans are occupied today, and that is politics. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right from the get-go, that politics does not belong in the pulpit, and the pulpit does not belong in politics. But the truth of the matter is that politics is simply the philosophy of how we live as a social unit, as a country. And that philosophy ought to be in light of the Word of God. It ought to be interpreted by the Scriptures. And so as we talk about some political things today, though we're not going to name names or choose parties, what we are going to discuss are some biblical principles whereby a Christian, those who believe the Word of God, could make intelligent choices regarding the future governance of this country, the land of America, the greatest land that has ever graced the face of God's earth. Politics is essentially a philosophy of life. And for a philosophy of life to be sound, it must be Bible-based. In other words, we've got to look at the Word of God and see what God says about human government. Now, the history of human government goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, where after the flood, God ordained Noah and human government to be that which interacts with and guides society. The basic unit of every society is the family. But as family units coexist together in what we call a social structure or a society, those family units and individuals need to be under human governance. We have this record all the way back from the book of Genesis. Now, the history of human government has been fascinating because human beings have experimented with a lot of different forms. We're all familiar with many governments of old which were monarchies. In other words, a king or a queen ruled territories or provinces, a monarchy. An oligarchy is a form of government whereby a small group of select individuals will govern a country or a nation. We've seen in the 20th centuries examples of tyranny. We've seen the communists under Stalin and Lenin. We've seen the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler. And these were dictatorships. These were tyrannies. We've seen the tyranny of Mussolini and others rise to the forefront in the past century, the 20th century. It seems like people are constantly experimenting with a type of government which would work best. But unlike different forms of government which were tried and failed and discarded, or tried and worked to some extent and folks labored along with them for sometimes centuries, rather than doing that, the founders decided to take a very natural look at human nature and the Bible. And when these things were compared one with another, it was discovered that as far as human nature was concerned, there was one form of government that would operate in the most unity and the most succinct fashion with our nature as human beings. The history, then, of government has been one of trying and discarding different philosophies over the years. The American experiment is unique. It's unique because, as a government, we have not based our philosophy upon the two things that generally in history have been the deciding factors in a government. Those two things are, number one, the grasp for power, or number two, the desire to create a utopia. The American experiment is not based upon either of those things. The grasp for power can be seen in monarchies, royal families, and in its rawest extent, dictatorships such as Nazism or communism, which by the way are two sides of the same coin, totalitarianism. The grasp for power is not what America was designed to be, nor was America designed to be a utopian society in which every need would be met for everyone. Utopias don't work. Utopian societies were designed initially by Karl Marx and Marxism. The concept of a utopian society ultimately leads to totalitarianism. But America rejected those things. Her founders rejected them, not a grasp for power. Because our founders understood that that government is best which governs least. That man, because he is innately sinful, will try to grasp as much power to himself as possible, and so our founders put in our Constitution checks and balances, limited amounts of power to limited branches of government. This is something vitally important. Our founders wanted to avoid then that pitfall of human nature that is greedy of power. Well, our founders also understood that because man is a fallen being, a sinful creature, he cannot create heaven on earth. He, in his sinfulness, must be governed, and that governance will always be imperfect, and it will never create a utopia. But by the same time, It can create the opportunity for the betterment and happiness of individuals. This then is the American experiment. Our founders crafted a democratic republic based upon their knowledge of human nature. What does human nature contain? It might be helpful as we consider these thoughts to think about this for just a moment. Human nature contains these elements undeniably. Number one, the need to be governed, because we are sinners and would tend to do the wrong thing if there were not external compulsions guiding us into the right path. The need to be governed. But secondarily, the need to be free. That's why our founders crafted a democratic republic and a limited republic, a limited government. Thirdly, human nature has the need to be heard. We have a republican form of government. We elect representatives to represent us in Washington, that the laws that they pass would be a direct representation of the people. And fourthly, human nature dictates we all have a need to achieve. The founders framed it in these words: the pursuit of happiness. Understanding that, then, we come to a simple conclusion. Free enterprise, democratic republic government, and free enterprise are the only methods of governance that will take into account the basic forms of our human nature. I want to talk about free enterprise capitalism for just a moment. Free enterprise capitalism, that which made America the economic powerhouse that it is. Why you are enjoying this video presentation today. The economic powerhouse of America is founded upon free enterprise capitalism. That means our economy has been based from the very beginning on free markets. And free markets and the free market system represents human nature in a tremendous way. Because human beings, according to their nature, react to markets based upon two things: fear and greed. And markets create and react to human nature, fear and greed, accordingly. This way of market reaction that is in accord with our human nature is the most efficient way to produce goods and services. If we want to better ourselves, we might call that greed. We produce more goods and services. In the production of more goods and services, we benefit more people while benefiting ourselves. And a rising tide will raise all ships. On the other hand, there's the fear factor. If I don't produce anything, or if I'm unproductive, I may go hungry. And so that fear factor creates in me a desire to be a productive part of society, if for the only reason that I have to put bread in my mouth. On the other hand, socialism does not allow for human nature. Socialism is government-controlled markets. Socialism, because it is government-controlled, is at its very heart inefficient and wasteful. But what's worse than that? Socialism removes man's chief motivators: fear and greed. In a socialistic system, I need not fear of being hungry. Someone else will provide for me. In a socialistic system, I do not have the motivating factor of receiving according to my work, because so much of my labor is taken to pay for the unproductive. Socialism lowers the standard, then, of living of everyone from the top down. In the next election, we're facing a choice, not between Democratic and Republic. We're facing a choice, not between political parties. We're facing a choice not between one party or another. Our choice in the next election is to choose freedom or to choose a failed utopian scheme. With that in mind, you'll note that the possible candidates in the field is narrowing. These are some thoughts to consider the next time you consider the future of your country. Thank you for listening, and thank you for tuning in today.